Let me assure you at the outset that this has almost nothing to do with the coronavirus, but it does have a tiny little bit to do, I can see. This is called On Being Perishable. So we were planning another of our little excursions when something unexpected came along that complicated our plans, and that was the outbreak of the coronavirus. It started in China, and they failed to contain it, and in short order it was on 6 continents, and then there were confirmed cases in the region we were intending to visit. And so it became quickly a very real question as to whether or not we should go. Then there were cases here also, so we figured stay or go, we were at some degree of risk. So working on very little evidence, we decided to go. Nothing like this has happened in my lifetime. Heck, they were curing tuberculosis, smallpox, and polio when I was a kid. It looked like medicine could handle anything, but not this coronavirus. By the time we were ready to leave, they were closing schools, and meetings and conventions were canceled, and places like Italy were shutting down, the whole nation, and our governor was closing all the colleges in the state, all of which seemed too late to do much good. But the politicians have to do something. The situation was getting scary. All the media was sending out the message not to panic, but they were doing it in a shaky voice. They were saying that children didn't seem to be affected, not as severely, and that if you were an adult in good health, the most that would happen is that you would get a fever and not feel so hot for a few days, and then you'd be okay. The only ones with a real concern, they said, were the elderly. Unfortunately, for us, that meant it was our turn to be the primary target. It's not so great when you hear that you're the ones on the spot. When you get to be my age, you begin to think about mortality anyway. And now, with this coronavirus, it's a very present, realistic consideration. If we get it, we could die, and the cases were popping up everywhere, closer and closer to us. So it is natural to think about it, dying, that is, but not brood about it. You only realize that it might not be that far off. And the word that occurred to me as we were preparing to leave was perishable. The contents of this package are perishable. How many times have you read that? Perishable items, non-perishable items. But it's a little different when you yourself are the item, when the body is the package that contains perishable material. And from the moment we are born, we are perishable. It changes your perspective when you start thinking of yourself as being perishable. While driving, the song playing in my head was "Only the Good Die Young," Billy Joel. But it's not about dying. He's horny, he wants to get laid, and he's using death to persuade his girlfriend, Virginia, of course, to put out for him. But sex is connected to death and the fact that we are perishable. Our first day out, we stopped at a museum specializing in a Native American collection. It was a big stone building. On the first floor there was a large, rambling gallery of art from the American West. There was a lot of breathtaking scenery, including a huge triptych by a pilot painter of the Grand Canyon. His intention was majesty, and he nailed it. I think every famous artist connected to the American West had work on display, lots of Remingtons and his pals. The theme of many of the artworks was the intersection of man and nature, with man as the despoiler, working his will, making his way, heedless of the natural destruction. And I stood before these impressive works thinking, perishable. On the second floor, there was a permanent collection of Native American history and artifacts. The history, of course, was grim and shameful. Dispossession, dislocation, disease, war, brutal treatment, broken treaties. The artifacts were amazing. Tools, clothing, baskets, incredible beadwork on vests, bonnets, and moccasins, colorful blankets, wonderful masks, and I beheld all of this thinking, perishable. There was a room of sculpture by an artist blinded by the Vietnam War, all of it labeled, "Please touch." Most of the work was sculpture of animals, birds, very intricately made by touch. Remington said that his paintings and watercolors would fade, but his sculptures, like Shakespeare's sonnets, would last. They were less perishable. Our destination was a little town called Zionsville. I think in the Bible that Zion is paradise, a heaven on earth. And it was a clean, bustling little town, with a main street of brick and many little shops, boutiques, cafes, and galleries. We walked along a nearby creek, and I thought about the town, which the locals call the village, and I thought about Perishable. No one there seemed to be concerned about the virus, but at night in our motel room, we listened to the president tell us not to be alarmed. And we got an email. A friend had been taken to a hospital, was in the ICU with respiratory distress, maybe dying. The book I was reading was the autobiography of Miles Davis. The part I was reading, Davis was a junkie for 4 years. He played some, lived a little, but mostly he was a junkie, lying and stealing to support his habit. The waste of talent and time, it was painful to read and easy to file under perishable. The next day we went to a nearby park that featured what was called the Ruins. A New York City building was going to be razed, and they held a competition to find the best design that would utilize and preserve the front and many columns. A local man won it. The building parts were shipped, and he spent years putting it together. A wealthy couple donated their farm to be used as a public park, and that place became the site for the Ruins, atop which are 3 crouching figures who seem to be holding up the weight of the world. A plaque said the figures represent the human races. I looked at the Ruins, so far from their home, but now supported and refurbished by garden clubs and patrons, and the thought was all about me. Perishable. We returned home, for the moment safe and sound, but the number of cases of coronavirus, they call it COVID-19, in the state had risen sharply in 2 days. The president and the governor declared a state of emergency. And I thought, perishable.